From Sugar 23, I'm Angela Ledgerwood, and this is Lit Up. This week we have a very special episode because I have my friend and colleague Liam Billingham on the pod. He also produces Lit Up. He's been on here before. And back by popular demand, he is here.
Popular demand.
It's truly.
Everyone's been clamoring to have me back.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Liam is in LA and I am in New York. And so Liam is often the silent person on all of the Lit Up interviews. But he is a huge part of this show. And he has a big job doing other things too. So he is the senior producer of podcasts at Sugar 23, where we both work. He's also the host of several podcasts, but the one that's kind of hit the charts at the moment is called Die Hard on a Blank. And Liam, give us in a nutshell, what is it about? Someone may have listened to the episode we shared recently.
First of all, thank you. My favorite part of my job is producing Lit Up, and that's a true story. But Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast that explores the influence of Die Hard on action movie cinema, one action movie at a time. So basically, Die Hard comes out, it has a huge impact on action movies. It changes the game. Gone is necessarily the muscle-bound Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzeneggers of the world, and it is like a regular guy who's just in LA to visit his wife when terrorists take over a building. And it was so successful and quite frankly so critically loved and is considered by many people to be the greatest action movie of all time, and it spawned a subsequent genre of basically what's known as Die Hard on a Blank. So the best example would be Speed is Die Hard on a Bus, or Cliffhanger is Die Hard on a Mountain. So there's according to my co-host Phil's count, 170 movies with the admittedly loose definition that this could be Die Hard on a whatever the case might be. And we are going through and covering those one movie at a time. So by the time this comes out, our last episode would be on the film Striking Distance, which is a kind of like Die Hard and a serial killer thriller sort of movie. It stars Bruce Willis, which is partially why we decided to cover it. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the thesis statement of the show is that we take action movies very, very seriously and try to figure out what they're about, both in terms of the story and the themes, and also how they relate to Die Hard and the impact that Die Hard had on the genre of action movies.
So you can imagine that Liam and I come at entertainment from two very different vantage points. Liam's often like, have you watched that show? And I'm like, what are you talking about, Liam? But
that's true. But I also love books. I'm a big book guy, and this show has enriched I read more interesting books because I'm the producer on this podcast than I ever did before. So I have you to thank for that.
Well, my pleasure. So wait, you're also the executive producer on a pretty big podcast at the moment, Time Person of the Week as well. So, Liam and I, before we record sessions with our guests, have a gossip and catch up pretty much before or afterwards. So I hear everything that's going on. Sometimes I get to suggest guests for that podcast too. But you're
an invaluable resource because you know everybody. It's so great.
Thank you. Well, so we decided to do this episode as kind of an end of summer roundup to see, I can share a little about what I've been reading and the themes I've been following, but also Liam is going to talk about what he's been watching, what he's also been reading. And we just thought we'd just capture how we usually kind of just catch up ourselves.
It's a gab session.
That's
a gab
right.
Session.
That's it. So
that'll be fun.
I mean, who's going to start?
Angela, why don't you start? Because you have a big trip coming up, right?
Yes.
We're recording this. You're going to be on vacation when it comes out, I think, or maybe just back. And I know you are preparing to go on a trip and probably reading some literature connected to that trip. So why don't you tell me what you're reading?
I will. I will. So I'm about to go to Cornwall, England, to go walking along the cliffside villages. And this is a vacation where everyone else is going to Greek islands or Nantucket, all these places to capture the end of summer. I have had to buy a new raincoat for my vacation because walking in England at this time of year probably means very chilly weather, wore lots
Hmm.
of wet socks and woolens, and I cannot wait.
That sounds amazing. That sounds
So,
amazing.
so a book that Anthony, my fiance, gave me was a British book called The Bell by Iris Murdoch. And I haven't read any of her books, and she's written, I think, maybe 50.
Hmm.
She's a prolific writer. And this one is set in the countryside of England, outside an abbey in a burgeoning, oh, I always get that word wrong, in a small community that's being established outside of a religious order. But what's going on inside the abbey is very private and mysterious. And there's a story about this place of a bell, the big church bell falling into the river
Huh.
somehow. And on that very night, there was a murder or a death. So they're kind
Whoa.
of dredging this bell up, and a lot of things are going to happen. But what's so like a signature of Iris Murdoch is kind of the latent sexuality that's
Mm.
written into her, into nature. And we kind of get this sense of foreboding. She described almost like these leaves as spread eagled, when we're talking about a young nun that's about to go into the abbey. So all along the way, you're trying to work out who's going to end up having a, frolic with whom, you know,
Oh.
at some point in the book, or what transgressions will happen. So it's quite heightened and really interesting. So
Have you
I'm
ever
kind of,
seen the movie Picnic at Hanging Rock from Australia, the Peter Weir movie?
Liam, what a
I,
question.
I,
Of
I
course.
figured you had, but it makes me think of that kind of like a mystery at well, it's a girls' school, right? But yeah, the like kind of like yearning as existential dread kind of thing. That sounds very much like Picnic at Hanging Rock. Of course, you've seen that movie.
Oh, and that movie, if anyone hasn't seen it, has inspired so much Aussie fashion. There's always kind of a picnic at Hanging Rock moment in a Zimmerman, story
Huh.
or things like that. And it may have been adapted from a book. I ought to know that.
I think you're absolutely right. Well, we can find that out. What's the name of the Iris Murdoch book again for folks listening if they want to read it?
Sure, it's called The Bell.
The Bell. Uh-huh. Okay, yeah, The Bell from 1958. I'm going to read this. It sounds great. Have you
She's a
started it?
master at character studies.
Mm.
Sometimes I find, in books these days, it's a bit like Charles Dickens or, Jane Austen. You can read just one paragraph introducing a character and you hear about the twitch of their moustache or the shape of their lip, and
Mm.
you already know what kind of person they're trying to make you believe this character is.
It's like a gesture. It's like a gesture or something that defines the twirling of the mustache. Or yeah, totally. I love that. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's what I'm reading to prepare for this trip, and I'll take it with me because I have to keep reading. And I'm going to take another book. That's why I mentioned Dickens, because Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver is
Oh.
based upon Dickens's David Copperfield, but it's set in the mountains of southern Appalachia. So
Huh.
it's taking a young boy, who's a kid to a single mom and going into that story. But apparently he's such a character that you just fall in love with this kind of wafy boy who has to survive. So they're going to be my vacation reads.
I, this is ridiculous, but when you say wafy, I picture like Timothy Chalamet as the main character of this book, kind of like a tiny little Boy, Picnic at Hanging Rock is a book. It was written in 1967, and the movie came out in 1975. And I've not seen it, but there was a TV version that came out a few years ago that
Oh, I'd like to
I've
read
not
that and
seen.
see it.
Yeah, I saw that movie like at a very young age, and I found it very, very troubling. Do you feel like this kind of fiction, the like existential, it's kind of classic stuff? Iris Murdoch is like not. I feel like I don't read as much of it as I used to, but I wonder if that's me reading more nonfiction now as an adult than I used to. I
I
feel like I read,
think,
yeah.
and I don't want to generalize, but I think a lot of men read a lot more nonfiction than necessarily women might. People will probably
Mm-hmm.
scream at me and say that's totally, s- you know, stereotypical. But I think maybe as adults, I find novels harder to get into
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, and that a nonfiction you can kind of pick up and put down a bit more easily.
Yeah, I think that's true. The stakes are lower. Like you're not as maybe not emotionally engaged, but like I just finished reading this book for the podcast called Last Action Heroes, which is about Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, Jean-Claude Van Damme, and it's a really entertaining read, but it's not a demanding read. So I definitely put it down. By the time this episode comes out, I think the author of that book will have been on Die Hard on a Blank. So I can just say I'm reading it because he's going to be a guest on the show. And I put it down for a couple weeks because I wanted it to be fresher for when we record with him. And I didn't feel like I had to start the book over again, if that makes sense. I was able to jump in like chapter 4 or whatever the case might have been.
No, I think a novel is so well read. If you have hours and hours to really dive in, I
Mm-hmm.
find if I put, right now I'm reading a manuscript and I've given it a few days off. And sometimes you can just forget about a novel and go, do I even want to go back in? Maybe it's sometimes easier to leave the thread, but maybe the best books, you just have to keep going.
Well, I'm also curious because you read for like a living, right? Part of your job is to read books. And like, because you have to think about reading a manuscript and thinking about like, is this a book I'd want to publish or get involved with? Or I have to interview an author, like, is reading sometimes more of a chore? And by extension, is the fact that you get to read Iris Murdoch on holiday like such a relief?
I, yes. The
Yeah.
relief of just picking a novel from a deceased author you couldn't even try to interview is a
Mm-hmm.
relief. I also think it's great to read books that have stood the test of time. So time curates for you in a
Mm-hmm.
way. So and I think Anthony bought this book because it was a bookstore recommendation, and they're so powerful. That wall of books
Oh,
with a
yeah.
with a real name next to them saying, this is why I love this book. That really helped. I mean, just going back to, reading for a living, and I'm sure it's the same with watching film, which I want to ask you about. It's almost like you just know it when you read it, and that
Mm.
becomes the joy.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know if you ever stop watching movies, but I stop reading proposals or I stop reading books if I just know it's not appropriate for our imprint or whatever the purpose might be. But then when there's that spark of reading something that you know is alive and could be really important, that's the most exciting part of my job.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so many things came up there. Like, so one of the highlights of my summer was going to New York City and spending 2 weeks there and seeing you in person, which we hadn't done in a while because you're in New York and I'm in LA. And going because I lived there for so long to my couple of my favorite bookstores, which were the Center for Fiction in downtown Brooklyn. I also I went to a couple other bookstores, but I used to, when I worked in downtown Brooklyn, I used to go to the Center for Fiction like quite a lot. And it's extremely hard for me to not buy a book when I go into a bookstore. Like that's what that's what you're supposed to do. But the going to the recommendation section and just being like, looking at everything that's there, it is really powerful. You're like, oh, Henry, the bookseller, or like loves whatever book, and it really makes you want to read. And there's so much out there that I find myself teetering between I want to read classic stuff. I have shelves and shelves and shelves of books that I've never read. But also, I went to Vroman's this summer for a book reading by a writer named S.A. Crosby, who wrote a book called All the Sinners Bleed, which is like a Southern noir. And he was there, and I chatted with him, and he signed the book. And I was like, I have to. The author signed this book and handed it to me, you know. So it's like I really want to read that, but I tend to not necessarily like look to new fiction. I tend to look backwards to fiction and look to new nonfiction to read. And as to your point of like men reading more nonfiction, I will tell you this: my dad only read nonfiction. He didn't read fiction. And I, as a kid, I kind of was like, oh, nonfiction, that's boring. And I asked him once, like, why do you read nonfiction? And his answer was like, I don't feel, or why do you only read fiction? Excuse me. And his answer was like, I only have so much time and I only want to read things that really happened, which is so interesting.
So that is nonfiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the world now. We're so pulled in so many directions, and time is your most valuable, the most valuable thing you have to give to people or to hobbies or books. And for all of us, we decide what kind of experience we want. And that's what's so wonderful about books, is that you can decide the next one is a nonfiction book about food, which leads me
Right.
to another theme of
Ooh,
so many books I'm being drawn to. Nice
good
transition.
I loved it. Oh, wait, can I interrupt one thing? I forgot to
Yes.
say. As far as putting down, not finishing a book or not finishing a movie, I really struggle with not finishing things. Like, I was watching something this week. I will not name it. Well, I will. It's a movie from the 80s called Code of Silence, which is a sort of detective action movie that's set in Chicago. And it's a Chuck Norris movie, and everything about the movie is good except for Chuck Norris. He's not good in the movie. He's a terrible actor. And I was like, I might finish this because I don't generally watch movies in one sitting anymore because I am an overtired parent of 2 children, so I fall asleep. So it's rare for me movie has to be pretty bad for me to not finish it because I try to enjoy everything. So yeah, and with books, I generally try to finish them. With TV shows, I will stop the second it doesn't work anymore because I just don't care.
Well, then I have another question for you. So, how good is a movie that you will see it twice or more than twice?
How often?
Because I know you do that.
I do it. I don't do it much. I will. Okay. Well, I think you're speaking specifically about one movie which I have seen twice this summer, and I'm seeing for a third time next week. That film is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. No, it's Oppenheimer, the Christopher Nolan a biopic meets atomic bomb film. You know, I have a really interesting relationship to his movies. Memento came out when I was 19 and blew my mind, and I've been ride or die ever since. Now, when I say ride or die, I don't mean like I think every movie that he makes is like a masterpiece and incredible. I mean it more that like I have half my life have been watching his movies and they fascinate me, and they sometimes they're provocative sometimes, and I don't think everything works, but I'm drawn to them because I admire the ambition and the spectacle. And so in the case of Oppenheimer, I saw it opening night at the local multiplex here in Burbank in 70 millimeter. And I was like, that was good. But I also went at 9:00 and so it ended at midnight. And I already had bought tickets to see it at the City Walk in IMAX 70 millimeter with what's called the 15 perf, which is the way you're supposed to see it. It's the way he filmed it. And there's only 30 IMAXs in the entire country that can show it that way. And one of them is 10 minutes from my house, which is why I like to live in LA. So I went and saw it, and you've seen it, right?
Yes.
What did you think?
I thought it was fascinating, and I was riveted from the moment it started and revolted, and I thought it was really interesting how there wasn't this moral judgment that was placed on these characters, but obviously there was in many ways, but the light of hand that way. I enjoyed it very, very much.
Yeah, it's very adult in that way. And I will just tell you that if you're a film person, the difference between the movie in the way that I saw it the first time and the second time, it is almost a different movie, because the IMAX 70 millimeter print is, I've never seen anything like it. Beyond whether like you like the movie or whatever, it is like, I mean, the IMAX in New York close to you is 11 stories tall. It is a massive screen meant for showing nature documentaries, and that's historically what IMAX is for. What Nolan has done is turned a character drama, which essentially this is. I mean, with the exception of the bomb sequence, which is amazing, that's what you think would be an IMAX. But the movie throughout cuts between IMAX and standard view throughout. So there'll be a shot of Oppenheimer, and then it will cut to the flashback of Robert Downey Jr., and Robert Downey Jr. will be massive. And so all of a sudden, it takes on this like scale and scope that is so emotional because of the size of the frame. And it might just be like Oppenheimer looking at the droplets of water or whatever the case might be. Like, it's truly a whole other movie in my point of view. And when it ended in the IMAX 70 millimeter, I was like, this is one of the most astonishing movie going experiences I've ever had. There's only really one person who can command the budget and the scope to do something. Well, that's not true. There's only one person to really choosing to do it this way. And so I was like, I have to go again. And like, there are people, Bill Gayabiri, who's a friend of mine and a critic at Vulture, has seen the movie 7 times. Now, he's seen it 7 times because he's been writing about it all summer. But his point of view on it is like, you can only really see this movie the way it was meant to be seen for the period of time that it's in the IMAX thing. And so it's kind of like, the joke with my wife is, she's like, how many times are you going to see Oppenheimer? And I'm like, well, it's kind of like my Eras tour. So if you're going to Taylor Swift, I'm going to see this movie multiple times, because it's at a time when so much of movie culture is like small screen and people are like whatever watching on their phones. The fact that I have to carve out 3 hours of the day, usually when my kids are in school, and like go sit in a movie theater and have this experience is like the closest I get to like church. I am not a church going person, but the scope of it is just like incredible. And it really feels like a different movie than it just does in a standard format.
I have to go. I maybe haven't been reading enough reviews about it that stress that point, that there's
Yeah.
a way to see this in the cinema.
Yeah, and I'm just a little obsessive about his work. Even I really like it. I read this book about him called The Nolan Variations in the lead up to this. I rewatched some stuff. Like, I really invested time in, because I kind of expected this movie to either be like his triumph, or in some ways I was like, if this doesn't work, like, man, like this is a big project, that gives him a different kind of potential legitimacy in terms of how he's viewed. And look, Christopher Nolan doesn't need to be loved. But so I was really excited, and I thought it was very good the first time. And the second time I was like, is this the best movie he's ever made? It's not my favorite, but it might be the best movie it's certainly like a 5-star achievement, and really works better as a film the second time.
Can you rattle off some of his other movies for people
Sure.
to put this in context in case they
I think I can probably rattle off
that?
all of them. So Memento, Insomnia, Batman Begins, The Prestige, the magician movie with Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale, The Dark Knight, Inception, The Dark Knight Rises, Interstellar, Tenet, which is a movie I love and nobody appreciates, but I think is amazing, and Oppenheimer. I don't think I forgot one in there. I'm not like necessarily a guy who can rattle off everyone's filmography.
Did he do Gallipoli? Or not Gallipoli?
No, that's Peter Weir. That was Peter Weir.
The war one, the other one.
Oh, Dunkirk.
Dunkirk.
Yes, I forgot Dunkirk, which is
I
also...
got got the
Great
chink in
movie.
your armor.
You did, and that's funny because that's the one I chose to that's one of the ones I chose to rewatch to prep for this because they have some thematic and not even thematic, I suppose, but they both take place during World War II. So that was one that I definitely chose to revisit, and is a very, very good movie. But yeah, this is kind of like his most experimental tendencies as a storyteller mixed with like this classic big theme of World War II and the bomb and quote unquote great men of history. And to your point, I don't think the movie considers Oppenheimer a quote great man of history. It's just kind of one way to describe what the movie is doing. Yeah, and I thought it was a real achievement and the platonic ideal of a movie-going experience in 2023. Like, I have two movie-going experiences. One is I go by myself to these big epics or these movies I want to see, and the other is like last week I took my daughter to see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was a blast, but is a very, very different movie-going experience than going to the IMAX by myself on a Friday morning.
Wait, are you gaming? On a Chromebook?
Yep. It's got a high-res 120Hz display, plus this killer RGB keyboard. And I can access thousands of games anytime, anywhere.
Stop playing.
What?
Get out of here.
Huh?
Yeah, I want you to stop playing and get out of here so I can game on that Chromebook.
Got it.
Discover the ultimate cloud gaming machine. A new kind of Chromebook.
I remember hugely being impacted by the Teenage Mutant Ninja movies when we were kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I
yeah,
don't know
they're
if they stand.
hugely important.
I'd love to go back. I just remember Splinter.
They hold up really well. I love that original 1990. It's dark and weird. She enjoyed the new one. She kept talking about how cute the Ninja Turtles were when they were babies, which is about her speed right now. She likes cute little... She's like, oh, they're so cute. And Splinter's pretty cute in this. And Splinter is voiced by Jackie Chan, which is really nice. It's like cool to hear him. So yeah.
Because
anyway.
I remember them being in the sewer system and Splint. That was really dark.
Mm-hmm.
What they were up against, which so many films of that era, New York City was a dark place, I guess. You know, it was not the city we live in that we feel is pretty safe and clean, even though that's kind of gone backwards a bit in the last few years.
I don't know. When I was there, it felt like the same place. I mean, I haven't, but when, I left in 2019 and being there in 2023, I was like, this largely feels like the same place to me, but I don't live there day in, day out, But yeah, it is they're dark movies. I would not show my 5-year-old daughter the 1990 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It would, and for a couple more years. I was 7 when I saw it because I remember seeing it in the movie theater, or 8. So
yeah, I think I would have been about maybe 9 or 10 then.
Movies were darker. Kids' movies were darker then, and in some ways, I think more interesting. I'm a big proponent of showing my daughter things that are like a little scary, like a little outside of her comfort zone, because I think I was shown stuff like that as a kid, and I think it sort of got me interested in art in a way that maybe I wouldn't if I was just... So much of kids' TVs now, I know we're off track here, this is dad stuff, but so much of kids' TV now is like disposable crap that when I have a chance to show her something like The Wizard of Oz or a Miyazaki movie, I'm like, this is what I want you to be seeing, because you watch Netflix cartoons the rest of the time.
I'm just now that we're on TV, I was just thinking when I grew up in Australia, I would be the kid on Sunday afternoons watching the like classic movies, like the Elvis ones with, who's the fabulous actress I love? Gidget. Sally Field.
Sally Field.
When she was Gidget, and then there was like Gidget meets Elvis. All the old classic movies that were so PG, but yet still adult themed.
There was no PG-13 then. You couldn't. There was only PG and R. So it was like it wasn't until like 1984 or 5 or something like that they were like, we need a new intermediate rating. Yeah, I miss just linear TV showing stuff that was inappropriate for me to watch, but I watched it anyway as a kid.
The only thing I got really spooked by was seeing Silence of the Lambs at a birthday party.
What? How old were you?
I've blocked it out. I think I maybe 10, at a sleepover, and it was terrifying. And I had to recover for a week of
my God.
nightmares. And, it then meant that my mother had to call up the mother who'd hosted the party, my friend's mom. It was a whole
Oh, it's
thing.
drama.
Yeah.
I was really scared. Speaking of topical, William Friedkin, the great film director who just passed away, I saw The Exorcist at far too young of an age. And that movie really, it still upsets me as a very, 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 very lapsed Catholic. I still have this devil fear kind of thing. And that movie just, I find, I mean, maybe now it's as an older person, it's just seeing a child in danger is what upsets me about it. Maybe it's not the spooky stuff, but making a sweet girl the literal Antichrist is pretty powerful still.
I can't remember when I saw that, but it was definitely not when it was terrifying or impactful in that way.
We went on a long tangent and you were supposed to
We
talk about
did.
food, which is
Yeah.
fine. I'm glad we did it, but I
That's
want to get back
fine.
to your food inspired books and
Oh, yeah.
what you've been thinking
So
about.
I'm always now thinking about food, always. And
Who
I'm
isn't?
learning, yeah, I'm learning a lot more about wine because my partner and I are growing grapes to make our own wine. And we just bottled last week the wine that we harvested from last year, which was our first year doing this.
Congratulations. That feels like a very big deal.
It is a huge deal, and it was such fun. So I was on the factory line essentially. So
I'm
it's
picturing
quite
you
an
as Lucy
extraordinary.
in I Love Lucy, crushing the grapes with your feet. That's sort of the image.
We did that. We did
Oh,
that.
that's
But that
amazing.
was last year, this time last year. So it'll be harvest time soon, usually sometime in September. Could be as late as October, but it all kind of is weather dependent. So because of that, I'm reading a book that came out a few years ago, and it's called Cork Dork by Bianca Bosca. And
a
it
great
was
name.
New York Times bestseller. And I'll just read you the subtitle because it gives you a sense. A wine-fueled adventure among the obsessive sommeliers, big bottle hunters, and rogue scientists who taught me to live for taste. So she was a tech reporter and decided to kind of immerse herself in the world of sommeliers. Now, that is a word I can never say correctly.
I can't say it.
So
I'm not even going to try.
I'm still butchering it. So please forgive me. I get made
Sommelier?
fun
Is it sommelier? I'm trying.
of. Sommelier. She actually, in the beginning of the book, she gives you, the phonetic way to say it. So I'm just trying to look it up for everyone. But even then, I find, here we go. Sommelier. Sommelier.
That's kind of is that what it's sommelier? Woof, that's a tough one.
Yeah, I always do this little Ellie in there, but it's
You need to learn to say it
sommelier.
if you're doing wine stuff, if you're selling wine though. And
I really, really do.
how many bottles
So-
of wine have you bottled?
Oh my gosh, so it will have been about 500 cases. So
Whoa.
everyone on this podcast is going to hear once it's ready to sell and get out to the world, I will be peddling our wine, but it's really, really good.
It's a rosé, right?
So we have a couple. We have a sparkling pet nat, which is a natural sparkling that's made from Merlot grapes. So it's this gorgeous pale pink, kind of cloudy pale pink because it's unfiltered. All the fermentation and everything kind of happens. A lot happens in the bottle. With champagne, they disgorge it, which means they let some out and add more sugars. But with a pet nat, it's natural kind of the process. So that we have that. We grow Cab Franc and Merlot grapes. So we have a Merlot, a Cab Franc, and then a carbonic Merlot, which is kind of a cool experimental way to, again, just see what happens with the grapes if you leave them to kind of bubble and infuse and do their stuff in a different way.
Kind
And
of a
then-
scientist. You're
Oh,
kind of a
it's-
scientist. It's so scientific, right?
Oh, it's brilliant. And, we have a winemaker, and I say that, the winemaker that is kind enough to lend us his expertise as his side project is a guy called is a great man called Byron Elmendorf, and he's the winemaker at Macari Vineyards on the North Fork, and he just got named, best winemaker on the North Fork, which is very
Wow.
exciting. So he, has a real point of view. We have a point of view about the kind of wines we like, and then we do it together. But Byron is the one who is the man in the science lab almost, of making these decisions about when is the right time to
Right.
move wine from one, vessel to the other, when it's time to bottle, all this really, really cool stuff.
That is really cool.
So that has completely influenced my reading.
Do you think you just walk around thinking about wine a lot now? Is that like a thing for you?
The thing is, because I'm pregnant, I cannot drink or taste
That's right, you can't.
the wine very much. I did have
Spoiler
some
alert
sips.
for the podcast. You didn't.
Yeah,
No, I'm just
yeah.
kidding.
I did have some sips to taste, but I cannot enjoy wine with abandon at the moment. But
Understandable.
that will
That's
change.
both understandable and very responsible of you as a person who's going to have a baby. Congratulations, by the way. I knew this before, but I'll just say it officially on the air. So is Anthony doing the tasting for you? Is he really stepping up?
Of course, yeah. And I had to tell him, because you're really on a factory line and it's really fast. Like once these things get started, the wine's coming into the bottles, into these machines, the corks are happening, then they get labeled and then they come out and you pack them straight into boxes. And it can get quite overwhelming if one part of this chain messes up. And, the whole crew of guys, they happen to be guys, although many, there are many women in the industry, but they all drink some of the wine before they get started, even if it's 9 a.m., just to taste what's really going in the bottle. So I had to say, hey, watch out.
Yeah, I feel like if I worked in like wine, beer, or one of these industries, like, you see these guys who are brewers at their cool breweries and they're drinking beer at 9 a.m. because it's like a professional kind of interest. And like I barely drink beer or wine anymore because I get very sleepy when I drink it. But I just can't imagine having like a alcoholic beverage before 5 o'clock anymore, because I just like, if I have a drink at 1, at like 3 o'clock, I'm like, when you have a kid and you go to birthday parties, you'll find that there are some parents that are like sparkling seltzers at the kids' birthday parties. And then there are the cool ones who are like, there's beer in the other cooler, wine in the other cooler. And you're like, yeah, like we're doing it. And you have one beer and then you get home from the party at 3:15 and you're like I've literally just come home and fallen asleep after like a 2-beer birthday party or something like that. It happens.
I think you have to work up your daytime tolerance.
I do. I have no daytime tolerance. But you know what? I'm 40. It's okay not to have daytime tolerance, is my feeling on that, at least. But also I fall asleep at night very early, so I don't have a window of tolerance anymore at all.
Well, then that's a question. How and when do you find time to read if you're a sleepy parent?
Well, so I will say that I think my reading has decreased a lot. Part of the problem is the phone being accessible and looking at articles that I half read on my phone. But what I've started to do, I have an 8-month-old who finally is a pretty good sleeper. So he's in bed by 6:37 these days, and my daughter's asleep by 8:15. And that hasn't always been true because of the challenges of this. So often I will get into bed at like 10 and read, for 15 or 20 minutes or till I start to fall asleep. And that really is so much better than, I don't even bring my phone into the bedroom anymore. I have 2 alarm clocks in the form of children running into my room or screeching from the next room over. So that is definitely my reading time. Though I will say I'm reading this Last Action Heroes book for the podcast. And when this will publish a few weeks later, but we're recording this on the Thursday after we got hit by a Tropical Storm Hillary, which was Sunday and was at least where we are only ended up being rain. We didn't get any wind, but we were homebound for the whole day. And my son still naps. My daughter doesn't. She's 5, he's 8 months. So we would put him down, and if we were lucky enough and she would distract herself, she's an oldest child, so she has a tendency to like want our attention all the time because she's used to it. She's had it for a long time. So if we could get her either into a groove of playing something she wanted to play, or if we had to be like, you want to watch one episode of TV, we would read our books. And so I read for a huge chunk of the day on Sunday. And I just have to say that like a lazy Sunday of reading is so rare for me now and so pleasurable that like it was really nice to read. I think I read 200 pages on Sunday. And also it's nice to be in a book that you're just devouring, right? You know, speaking of like sometimes literature, it can be hard to be like, you know, especially if it's thoughtful and interesting, like I imagine The Bell by Iris Murdoch is, it can be hard to really dig in and just get totally absorbed. And with this kind of like light, really enjoyable nonfiction Last Action Heroes, I just was destroying the book. I mean, I just was reading and just like so enjoy and so pleasurable to just have a book that feels good to read. Like reading that feels good, which is a big thing of this podcast, is what lights me up. And I don't do it enough.
I also think it's so good for our brains to have that prolonged concentration, but mixed with pleasure.
It doesn't happen enough in life anymore, you know?
Yeah. It's like a snow day, you know, and all of a sudden you're homebound and you think, oh, well, what do I do? And to decide not to watch television, I can't watch TV in the day. It just really gives me the creeps. So
me too. Why
and
is
I'd rather
that?
really read anyway. But
why does that? Why is it so depressing to watch TV during the day?
I think it. Oh, I mean, to me, it just says that there's kind of been a breakdown in
organization,
routine, or although there is nothing better than watching a movie on a Sunday afternoon, as I said, when it's snowing. Or, you know, but I think
I will. I don't like you know, my daughter when she's home from school earlier, she'll be like, "Can I watch TV in the middle of the afternoon?" And like, of course, we'll let her if we have to work or whatever. But we're not like, especially workday TV people. Like, we don't, except for like if something extraordinary is happening in the world and the TV's on. But like, you know, usually we're just working all day, and I will occasionally have YouTube on in the background or whatever, but I will say that the 2 times I really enjoy watching things that's not the evening time is sometimes if my daughter and my wife are out of the house in the middle of the day on a Saturday and the baby's napping, I will be like, this is my chance to watch that like 90-minute gritty independent movie that I've wanted to see. Or like, and I will be able to concentrate. Right. Yeah, totally. It's important. And Sunday afternoon movie time where we make popcorn and we get my daughter to actually commit to a night. Like Wizard of Oz, she like kind of blew her mind. You know, those kinds of experiences are nice. But I'm pretty anti like TV on a Tuesday afternoon makes me sad. I don't know why. Yeah. Maybe it's because like daytime TV, which I don't really watch. But like the whole idea of that is like, if you watch daytime TV in the middle of the day in America,
it just feels like you've let something go in a way.
Yeah.
Like, eesh.
You could be using the day more productively.
Yeah. When I grew up, like what was on in the day was like the Ricky Lake, then the Donahue, then the Oprah.
Yeah, the sort of self-help weirdness.
I watched a lot of TV as a kid.
Did you have The Price is Right in Australia?
Of course.
Okay, I figured.
But we had our Aussie version.
Oh, really? Okay. What was it called?
Yeah.
Was it The Price is Right?
Is
Aussie? Okay, yeah. So you didn't have Bob Barker. You had like Australian Bob Barker, whoever that happened to be.
I can't remember who it was. Now, Liam, we have to wrap this up.
I know. Well, this is what happens, guys. This is why we just talk.
This is why we have to put time limits, because we could just yap and then we realize that we've not got to the work stuff. But
well, this is work stuff.
This is. But is there... Look, you also have such good TV and film recommendations. Can you just like give us a quick hit list of just some things that are worth our time?
What have I been watching lately? Well, right now I think I'm between shows. I recently watched, and I should say this is a Sugar 23 client, but Steven Soderbergh's series Full Circle on HBO Max, which is a pretty amazing 5 or 6 episode series about a kidnapping of a boy, of a rich boy in Manhattan, but also the story of who kidnapped him. It is based on a Japanese film called High and Low from 1956, directed by Akira Kurosawa, which I only bring up because it is maybe one of my top 5 films of all time. It's an absolutely astonishing police procedural.
Would you recommend watching that film first?
No, I mean, I think what's interesting about that, what Soderbergh and the writer Ed Solomon have chosen to do, High and Low was sort of about the have and have-nots and the animosity between them in post-World War II Japan. And I think that this film is about that in a much more globalized sense. Now, that makes it sound like it's very serious, but it's pretty like Steven Soderbergh has found a way to make frothy, entertaining genre films that also have a little undercurrent of reality in them. And this is just a good watch. And specifically, the best thing I think about it is Claire Danes is always wonderful as like a neurotic New Yorker. She's sort of made a meal out of that between this and the Fleischman is in Trouble show that she did earlier this year. And an actress I love, Zazie Beetz, who has been in a million things but plays like a prickly post office inspector detective in this, and she's very quote unquote unlikable, and she really commits to it. And it was kind of one of those things where I was like, I want the Columbo version of this. Like, I want this woman to do a week in, week out detective show, which would be very different from Full Circle. I think that is definitely something lately to watch, and it's on Max, not HBO Max, but Max.
That sounds amazing, and I've been threatening to watch it, and I will. Okay,
It's
I
worth
have
it.
one book to share, and I will sign off. And the thing that's next up for me is a nonfiction book called National Dish. And it's by the well-known food writer Anya von Bremzen. And she explores 6 of the world's most fascinating and iconic culinary cultures. So she goes to France, Italy, Japan, Spain, Mexico, and Turkey. So it's almost like if you were a foodie, it's like an eat, pray, love of examining these places and their foods and the stories around them. But she is a really funny woman. She's from the Soviet Union and has a really amazing memoir called Mastering the Art of Soviet Cooking. And she's written a lot since the war with Ukraine to kind of bring context, to their national dishes and support the people of the Ukraine. So I'm going to leave everyone with that. And I'm sure people are going to want you back again, maybe for a full episode.
This is a full episode. We talked for 50 minutes.
No,
this is as full as it gets.
For fall.
Fall. I heard
the
full
autumn.
episode. The autumn. Yeah, I'll come on and talk about flannels and my favorite sad dad music. That would be. But I live in Southern California, so like sadly seasonal. Maybe we should do that so you can tell me what's happening in New York, because I am a East Coast kid in a West Coast.
To tell you about the
existence
cable
now.
knits and the scarves you could be.
Well, the
could be
nice thing
wearing.
is you can layer in Southern California in like October, November, December. But the nice, also by like 1 p.m., you're like, oh, I can take all these.
I don't know if you
layers
can
off.
turtleneck, though.
I'm not a turtleneck guy. I have a very sensitive. I'm a big flannel guy, but I hate turtlenecks. Not my.
He has
not
a
my vibe.
sensitive neck, everyone.
I have a very sensitive neck because I'm just a sensitive boy. This was so fun, Angela.
Thank you, Liam.
That's it.
That's it.
Any
I know
parting
that was
words?
such a weird tone.
Hey, wait!
in my
Can I ask you a
Liam.
question? Can I ask you a question before we wrap
Yes.
up? That I don't think you've ever been asked this on the podcast, but maybe I'm wrong. What lights you up lately, Angela?
Oh my God, what lights me up? Truly, I know I spoke about the wine bottling, but being with a crew of people who are passionate about something and being in a team. Like the day I got to be part of that team and we all had our roles and things like shit was going to go really badly if everyone didn't concentrate and get it together. And there was something so fun about that experience. We had a schedule to get through, and like Byron's a dad and he needed to go at 3:30 to like pick up his kid, but it meant we had to bottle all this wine, and that really lit me up. Also, there's something fabulous about concentrating on a task like that's physical, and I found that if I let my mind wander, I would make a mistake collecting all these bottles. So it was a really good lesson.
How do your body experience?
Yeah, in focus, like being focused, being part of a team, and having a beautiful product to look at the end of it and feeling a sense of accomplishment. That really lit me up. Now we just have to, now there's a new stage to people drinking this wine and enjoying it. So that's for the moment.
That's a great answer. I can't wait to try the wine when it is available to the world. Well, I guess you'll tell us all about that when that
I will
happens.
tell you all about it. But it's
Do you have a name for it yet?
Yeah, it's called Old Sound Vineyard. And we live on Old Sound Road in Mattatuck, where our, vineyard is, and these acres of grapes. Vineyard sounds very grandiose. It's a few acres of grapes, which is very different than what's out on the North Fork, but we've made it our own.
Well, that's lovely. Makes me want to come back. It makes me want to be back in New York and the
We'll
East
have a
Coast.
wedding eventually, a big party.
On the North
out
Fork?
Here. Yeah, out here.
Very cool.
So you can visit
Okay.
Old Sound.
I'd love to. All right, now we have to stop because
Now we
this
have to
is
wrap.
just ridiculous. Okay,
Bye,
thanks
everyone.
everybody. Bye.
Boop. Lit Up is a podcast from Sugar 23. It's hosted by me, Angela Ledgerwood, and is produced by Liam Billingham. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. The theme music is by Andrei Radovsky. Until next time, bye everyone.